I can guarantee it. Today's program is sure to help you with some tips and techniques for decoding the conflict mindset. Our guest today, Bill Eddy, internationally known and famous speaker, social worker, certified family law specialist, and acclaimed mediator. He is truly a gem in his own right for many, many reasons, not only through his vast experiences dealing with people from all walks of life, in conflict, in mediation, but also as a prolific author. Bill brings to us today not just about family issues, we touch on that. More importantly, he has now translated his work, like I have, into the work world. How to resolve conflicts at work, particularly with high conflict personalities, or what we call HCPs. Now, are we going to go around and tell someone they're a high conflict personality? Absolutely not, and Bill will tell you why. But he does give some fabulous tips, biff, and more to help structure our conversation with people with high conflict personalities or just high conflict energies, but also strategies for how and why they work. Do listen, you'll learn so much. I can't wait to have Bill join me very shortly. Well, Bill Eddy, I am so excited to have you here today with the High Conflict Institute. You know, we go back quite a few years, don't we?
Yes, probably 20, I think.
At least. Think so. Well, let me ask you, I think one way to frame it, and I know we'll get more into some of your programs, you launched New Ways for Families when?
2009.
2009, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
So 12 years ago, and we started at High Conflict Institute a year before in 2008. So we've been doing this high conflict stuff intensively for the last 12 years, but to some extent for at least 20.
Yeah. And I know that I definitely knew you before that because of, quite frankly, some of my own high conflict experiences earlier in the 2000s. And it was before that I actively got into family mediation around 2000.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when our pathways started crossing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Bill, let me first share with our viewers and listeners a little bit about your background, because you have such a stellar background, and I might add a little bit too because of what I know about you. Okay.
Okay.
So as Bill has already said, he is the co-founder and chief innovation officer for the High Conflict Institute right here in San Diego, and pioneering what we call HCP, high conflict personality theory. And Bill, you are one of the leading experts now nationally, if not globally, around high conflict personalities. You've brought such a wonderful depth of understanding to all of us as far as what goes on there. And what I'd like to share is that, you come not only, with a mediation background, but with an extensive law background. And prior to that, a licensed clinical social worker. So I love the progression and like to share that with people. And of course, you were with the National Conflict Resolution Center for about 15 years and a certified family law specialist. And so, just a wealth of background, experience, exposure to people. And my understanding is that you still serve on the faculty for the Strauss Institute for Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine, correct?
Correct, yes.
And also a conjoint associate professor with the University of Newcastle Law School in Australia. I didn't know about that one.
That's still true. That's by Zoom the last couple of years.
Oh, fun. I've been doing some speaking for MedFast, or Mediation Steadfast, I should say, in Perth. And so it's fun to connect with them as well. And as I mentioned, I know that you're global and you've spoken in over 10 countries in at least 30 U.S. states. And I know that you're heading to Calgary, Alberta, Canada very soon and have some work going on there as well.
Yes. A lot of work in Canada. Actually, I think I've been in 7 provinces by now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, well, I know Alberta well, having worked there quite a bit too in workplace mediation.
Mhm.
But one of the things that amazes me, Bill, is that, when we were getting ready for our podcast today, is that you said you had published 2 books this summer. How do you do this? I can barely get out one.
Well, I must say they've been in the works. And the way I write is usually I think about a book obsessively for about a year, and then I sit down and write it. So COVID gave a chance to pull all those thoughts together and get them down on paper.
Well, that's great. Maybe I can borrow and learn from you on that, because you have actually written over 20 books, 2 of which are award winners. And I know that you have a popular blog on Psychology Today, where I'm also present. And we'll talk more about your recently released book about high conflict mediation. But I'd like to, sort of get into a little bit of, I think we all get, stymied with high conflict personalities, and, how do you resolve conflict? And it really does require a shift in thinking, not only in our thinking and how we approach people, but just the high conflict mindset, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you do have to adapt what you do, because you can't change them.
Yeah, that's a big mistake if we think that we can change people in any walk of life, for that matter. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, what makes this individual, who we might call a high conflict personality, so very different? What are some of the earmarks or trademark characteristics that go along with high conflict personalities?
Well, usually what's actually fairly observable once you get to know somebody is, first and foremost, they're preoccupied with blaming others. It isn't just, oh, by the way, I think it's your fault. They're invested in the idea that it's all your fault. And they really don't see a connection. We like to say they don't connect the dots from their own behavior to how other people respond to them. With that is a lot of all or nothing thinking. And so they see problems in all or nothing terms, and they offer solutions in all or nothing terms. It's my way or the highway, buddy. That's the kind of message you get. Thirdly is a lot of intense and perhaps unmanaged emotions. And so you're often shocked by kind of a blast of anger or fear or just upset coming your way. And yes, most people are like, whoa, what's happening here? And caught off guard. And often people do things that they shouldn't do in response. So that's why we teach methods to help manage relationships where possible. And of course, the fourth thing is that they do at times engage in behavior that we've really found about 90% of people would never do. So sometimes they'll say, oh, well, I hit him because he said such and such at work, and I couldn't have someone just say something like that. Well, 90% of people don't do that when someone says something they don't agree with. Or send a knowingly false allegation out to a work group about a coworker that they're angry with. Or, take things from the workplace, workplace theft, because they feel justified because the workplace treated them unfairly yesterday. So this kind of behavior, thinking and emotions, pretty much become observable, especially if you're in a close situation, a close relationship, dating, marriage, close friend, close neighbor, and close coworkers. So people who don't work real close together might not know about this, but the people that do work close together go, oops, not again, something like that. So this is pretty much a way to identify them.
Thanks. That's a really nice synopsis. And, dealing with a high conflict personality is very energy consuming. You can feel the intensity of their emotional presence. And I know, you talk my way or the highway. I was just coaching an individual this morning, And I just said, whoa, she's come a long way over a number of months of being in a very high conflict situation that led to very adverse legal consequences for her. And I said, whoa, I see so much progress in you, but you just jumped off the cliff again. And guess what? The only one you hurt in the process is you.
Yeah. And it's so hard because when people do change, when they have these characteristics, and I should emphasize there's a real range. So some people have these somewhat, some people have these severely, but many people can be worked with. And I'm glad you mentioned coaching, because we find that's one of the most effective ways to work with high conflict people and take off some of the rough edges. But it takes a lot of repetition, and people fall back. And remember, these are adult personalities. And so they've had a lot of years to develop this approach to life. And it's not a switch that someone can turn. And there's no pill you can take for this. It's just learning to manage one's own behavior. And with coaching, some of them do.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where I've seen the most success. Just going into a mediation, for example, or going into a business intervention. If you already see the hallmarks of this kind of behavior, that's dangerous ground to just go into that kind of situation without some pre-coaching and redirection of their behavior. And you can't achieve those shifts through strategies when you're working one-on-one people, because then you're not exposing their vulnerabilities in the presence of others.
Yes. Before I forget it, I wanted to quickly squeeze something in. Even though I described what they appear like and the patterns of behavior, I want to emphasize, don't tell the person you think that they're a high conflict person. And I'll probably say that more than once, or I hope I do, during this discussion, because that people innocently go, oh, you're a high conflict person. You just have to stop blaming people, Sam. And it's like, from that point forward, your relationship will be very difficult. So don't do that. It's easy to make that mistake unless you know. Never tell someone you think that's a high conflict person that you think that way.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because, quite honestly, that's just a form of labeling. Yeah. And after all, it wants to be labeled something no matter what it is, and it's a slippery slope. And so be mindful about not going where they go. Otherwise, you'll end up in more conflict. I always talk about the high conflict situation, and there are earmarks of what that looks like, frequent complaints, active litigation,
Yeah, so you get, I think, a significant amount of litigation is this. And one thing you said about active complaints, I want to mention, you mentioned that I teach at a law school in Australia, and I until COVID, I was for about 10 years going to Australia every year for about 3 weeks and getting to participate in conferences and trainings. And I attended a conference in Australia on workplace bullying, because Australia has nationwide some strong laws against workplace bullying with some teeth in them. Executives can be personally fined if they ignore a case of workplace bullying that's come to their attention. But the point I want to make is I was asked to talk about high conflict personalities at one of these conferences. And a lot of the people present, there's about 50 people who do workplace investigations. And so I asked them, I said, high conflict people are really preoccupied with blaming others. So they don't just act badly, they blame other people for acting badly. And I said, what percent of people do you think who bring complaints about workplace bullying against coworkers, supervisors, employees, are the more high conflict person, the person who actually may be an offender and the other person not? And they said maybe 40%. And that was really high, but I think it's not surprising. This has become a new weapon for high conflict people. So investigators have to have their eyes open and looking at, is this the person we're pointing at, or is this the person who's doing the pointing? That's really the bigger problem here.
Excellent point. That's consistent. Then I know some stats here in San Diego as it applies more to family situations. But if I recall the stats for divorcing situations, about 30% or so are considered high conflict divorces too. So there's some parallels in those numbers.
Yeah. And it's a good analogy because it's really, again, about close relationships. And that's who often ends up blowing up at work, is people who have to deal with each other a lot. We're seeing that even with the governor of New York, and the people he worked closest with are now suing him for his own behavior. And he apparently couldn't connect the dots and see what was coming.
Just all kinds of examples start popping into my mind, as we continue to talk. And, I do a lot about, the drive to survive, the fight, flight, freeze mechanism. And so that's one of the things to, in a way to really look at as far as how reactive are people. And so what are your thoughts about why people are so reactive and become so defensive rather than embracing more of that problem solving approach? What drives that?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's not everybody. I think of high conflict people as about 10% of the population. And when you think of it as personalities really develop from three things. First is your genetic heritage, what you're born with, tendencies that may or may not get developed. Secondly is early childhood, the first 5 or 6 years. What happens there really influences your close relationship behavior because you have a close relationship with your parents. But the third thing is culture. And culture really influences also some of personality development. And so when you think about today's culture, we've really gotten into a lot of blaming, a lot of denying responsibility. Cultural leaders, whether it's celebrities, politicians, the upper management and workplace, really influence people's behavior. And so what we're seeing is people who have less self-restraint are now being more negative, making more comments, being more antagonistic to people, and maybe even physically abusing people. People who, when the culture was more about taking responsibility, people who wouldn't have done things. So we see the cultural loosening some of the standards has loosened some of the self-restraints. And we need to kind of bring that back a little bit.
Well, thank you for identifying those three key components to how this develops. I was doing a program just yesterday with a group of social workers dealing with high conflict minors being taken out of their homes. And so trying to teach them some of the strategies for influencing change and things like that. And so we spent quite a bit of time talking about those ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences.
Yes.
And the problems it leads to and can maintain and be consistent throughout adulthood.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, and not just interesting, but important, is adolescence is an important time to correct some of these behaviors, because we see once people are adults, if they have a high conflict personality, it's much harder to change and may not even be possible. But in adolescence, that's the time to really get people onto a better path. And so when people say, well, he's just a teenager, don't give him a hard time, it's like, he's just a teenager, now's the time to give him a hard time so that never happens again, whatever that behavior was. But I also want to mention something is all three of the things that I said about personality development, a person growing up doesn't really have control over. They don't have control over their genetic tendencies. They don't have control over their early childhood, and they don't have control over the culture they grow up in. So I think it's important for us to have a lot of empathy and to think more in terms of how do we change and correct these behaviors or coach people, and how do we set limits and protect society from the people who aren't going to change. And in the workplace, it's a fine line. We don't know, is this someone to fire or someone to keep? But it's important to know that, you know, people aren't happy being high conflict people, and they didn't get this way on purpose.
Absolutely. And, you know, going to the workplace, and I'm going to come back to that, but one of the things that I found very interesting in reviewing some of your materials and preparing for today is what you said, you know, part of that, you know, you said, you know, kids growing up don't have control over those three contributing factors. And yet, you know, a lot of adverse experiences can occur. And so you talked about not being able to go through the normal grieving process. So say more about that, how you see that play out.
Yeah, I think that's real essential to understanding high conflict people. It really seems that they don't go through the normal 5-stage grieving process. And that normal stage, the normal process is first denial. It can't be true. It isn't really happening to me. And then anger. Well, if this is happening, I'm going to fight it every inch of the way. And then people start bargaining and looking at, well, what if I change this? You think in the workplace, someone's going, well, wait a minute. What if, you know, I come to work on time now? You know, can I keep my job after I've been late for 2 years? Bargaining against the inevitable loss. The 4th stage is depression. The person feels the pain of the loss, turns inward, and goes through a depression, often brief, depends on the situation and the person. And the 5th stage is acceptance. And so this seems to happen in regard to any major loss, even minor losses. We just naturally go through this. Well, one thing we identified years ago about high conflict people is that they don't go through that. They get stuck at the 2nd stage, anger. And so if you would feel sad about something, they'll feel angry about it. It's like they can't allow themselves to feel vulnerable feelings. So they go on the attack and blame other people and get angry at them. And of course, in legal cases, they lose the case at trial, so they appeal. And as a lawyer, I've seen a lot of these cases in the Court of Appeals opinions. And they even say sometimes it's clear that this is a difficult family or a difficult workplace, etc. So it's really understanding they don't go through this process makes it important to shift how you work with them. And I don't know if you're ready for it, but I have 4 key things that I call the 4 forget about it's.
Yep, I was just going there. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Perfect timing. So because they have these unresolved emotions, there's so much going on inside: chaos, pain, hurt, anger, all of that. So the first one I like to point out is don't try to give them insights into themselves. That just triggers defensiveness, and they'll say, I was right to be that way, and don't talk down to me, and why don't you like me? And I've had people say that. I've said, you know, if you just stop doing that thing you kind of do a lot, you'll be so much happier and people will like you better. And their response is, why don't you like me, Bill? And it's like, I like you. I'm just trying to help you. Well, you're not helping, Bill. You're criticizing me. And so what we've learned, 2 things about insight: they're not going to get it, the insight you want, and it's going to make your working relationship with them worse. And so I teach this to lawyers, mediators, therapists, coaches, managers, etc. Just forget about insight. What you're going to want to do is talk about what their choices are now. So you're focused on what to do, not reflecting. Second thing is try not to emphasize the past. Try to focus on the future. And that fits together with insight, but it needs saying on its own. High conflict people tend to be stuck in the past. They're living in the past, and they're always trying to rewrite the past. And I think this is because they can't grieve the past and move on. So if they can rewrite the past, then they can feel good about themselves and bad about other people, instead of maybe I did something wrong, which is a thought they can't consciously hear. And so you really want to emphasize what to do and structure your process to spend very little time, if any, on the past. The third is try not to open up emotions or have emotional confrontations. And I used to just say, try not to have angry confrontations. But then I started seeing in some of my mediations that if a high conflict person or the other, if one person was becoming sad and crying, the high conflict person would become sad and cry. And it was like they couldn't manage their emotions. It's emotional boundaries are hard for them. Sadness as well as anger, just any emotion. Emotions are contagious. People need to remember that. But also that if you just even ask them how they're feeling, there's a risk of trouble. And I'll give a real quick example with that. I had a high conflict mediation, divorce mediation, husband and wife, both very difficult. They both had lawyers in the room that I knew and who were good. And between the three of us, we managed them to make some progress. After 2 hours, we scheduled a future session because most of these sessions after 2 hours aren't productive. So 3 or 4 2-hour sessions, yes, are what my mediations usually were. So we're scheduling the next session, and it takes 5 people a while to schedule a session these days. Then, as they're packing up to go, the lawyer for the husband turns to him and says, "Don't you feel better now?" Well, the husband said, "Absolutely not. In fact," he said, "this was total waste of time. In fact, I'm never coming back." And he never did. Whoa. What went wrong? The lawyer put him in touch with his feelings. And remember, there's a lot of unresolved feelings in there, and it's just going to be terrible. So you don't want to focus them on their feelings. You want to focus them on thinking, like, what do you think of that proposal? And focus them on doing, where can you get more information? That kind of thing. Let's plan our proposals for the meeting rather than, "So how are you feeling today?" It tends to blow up, and it's a subtle thing people don't think about, but I want to save people going through that. So that's insight, the past, opening up emotion, avoid all of that. The fourth is avoid calling them high conflict people, which I said I'd repeat. So here I am repeating it.
Well, great. You bring out something then too. When I'm working with people and trying to help, provide some of the psychology behind people in conflict and what drives them, is to recognize, that, a good 50% of people are the feelers, but the other 50% are really more of the thinkers. And the more you get them focused on thinking concepts and task ahead of them, then that helps them sort of redirect and manage that emotional driver. All cognitions are preceded by emotions. We know that now. And high conflict people are really fueled by their emotions, but they, like you said, they don't know how to manage it. And so by getting them concentrated, I love how you brought in the term of make proposals. You get them thinking about things, looking into the future, moving off the past. And, those are very concrete things to realize. And that, if you ask a thinker what they feel, you're not going to get very far. And likewise, if you ask a feeler what they're thinking, you're not going to get much back either. So it's being able to read the clues and using your skills accordingly.
Yeah. And majority of cases with high conflict people, I find that they lack emotional boundaries, emotional self-management, what they call emotion dysregulation. And so the structure of the process needs to help them not get focused on their emotions, but focus more on thinking. And frankly, it makes it so much easier. It's less stressful if the task at hand is thinking and doing rather than having to resolve emotions, because that it just doesn't work for them and it's painful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it brings up a lot of hurt and memories and then actually drives them back into the past in many situations. Yeah. Well, I'm curious, Bill, particularly, we've talked about mediation. We've actually talked about the divorce field a bit too, and you've mentioned the workplace, and that's where the bulk of my mediations have also been, is in workplace relationship issues. And when we talk about leaders, I find so many times supervisors and managers simply ignore, those emotional breakouts because they don't know how to deal with them. And what would be some suggestions you have specifically for our leaders at whatever level in the workplace so that they have some options about what to do and where to go with some of this?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things is communicate with people with what we call ear statements. And they include empathy, attention, and respect. And you mentioned that I got 2 books out this summer, and that was the other book, Calming Upset People with Ear. And it's basically giving people a statement, can be a sentence, that shows empathy, like, wow, I see how frustrated you are. Let's talk about what we can do. Or I hear that you're really worried about how this is going to turn out. Those kinds of things are empathy. Sometimes I feel that way too, is a way to express empathy. Or you can say they're angry, and they're angry at you, like at the boss, and the boss can say, wow, tell me more. I want to understand what's going on, rather than you better calm down, buddy. If you say, tell me more, I want to understand what's going on in a calm voice, the other person will calm down. It's much more effective than telling them to calm down. And then listen and let them know you can empathize or you respect something. And that's the third, is respect. I respect how hard you worked on that project last week. Or I respect the skills that you brought in. That's why we wanted you on this team. So empathy or attention or respect. It's a very simple technique, just a sentence or 2. The key thing is you shift focus from not defending yourself to giving them an ear statement. And once you get practiced at doing that, employees love it. They really feel recognized, feel valued. And the same as in relationships. You can do this with children, teenagers. You can do this with aging parents. Everyone wants empathy, attention, and respect. You just have to be willing to focus on them rather than defending yourself.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you brought in the ear statement, because I know that has been very valuable in helping me shape some of my work. So I'd like to add a little acronym I have, Bill, because we all want to be acknowledged. We want to feel that that we're appreciated for being there. And so I call it a acknowledgement for peak performance. And so P means thank you for being here. Your presence is really important so we can get started on that project. Being timely is being punctual. So presence, and that could also be substitute for performance. The other one is then effort or energy. As I thank you for your effort on this project. Your contributions are significant. And then the next one is attitude or actual accomplishment. I just love the great attitude you bring to work every day. That's contagious. And then the last one is not a K, but a C, and that's where we do talk about contribution. And all of those things are simply what you observe and don't cost you anything.
Right. Oh, and I'm so glad you made that point, because so many people are like, well, if I show empathy for him, it's like I'm giving in. Yeah. No, you're connecting. You haven't given up anything. So excellent point. Excellent point.
Great. So, Bill, if there were two or three key takeaways, I mean, you've given some excellent points here today, and these will be in the show notes, as we write this up. What would you tell our leaders, our mediators out there to, keep in mind?
Well, the other thing besides your statements to emphasize is in problem solving is get the high conflict person participating by having them set agendas for meetings, is like bring your agenda items. And if you have a complaint in the workplace, I want you to also bring a solution. And that comes to proposals. And proposals are the center, really, of the new ways for mediation method that we talk about in our new book, Mediating High Conflict Disputes. So getting employees to participate in proposals, in legal cases, getting clients to participate in proposals, all of that really makes a big difference because you're helping them think and steer clear of those emotional reactions, because emotional reactivity is one of the biggest problems, and you can't shut that down. What you have to do is distract it with something productive. So setting an agenda and making proposals. Now with proposals, we have a 3-step process. One person makes a proposal, and this can be very informal. One person makes the proposal. The other person needs to ask questions about it, not react to it. And the mediator has to be very careful to block the reaction and say, no, I want you to ask 2 questions. Well, okay, well, when would this plan begin? Or what would my part be in this proposal? Something like that. Who, what, where, and when questions. We don't want why questions because they're usually trigger defensiveness, and they're really a criticism in disguise. Like, why did you ever think I'd agree to that? We don't want that, because we want the thinking brain engaged with questions, and then say, yes, I can do that. No, I don't agree, or let me think about it. That keeps it really simple. And especially with high conflict people, I'll think about it. It's a really good answer because it means they're giving it some time, and that may help them overcome emotional reactions and think about the benefits of a proposal. So it's proposal, questions, response. And this doesn't have to be real complicated, and it can go back and forth. I've had a lot of mediation. Someone makes a proposal, the other person asks questions, they revise their proposal, they add another piece, and all together, they come up with an agreement. So that's really at the core of problem solving, I think, with high conflict people.
Well, I just love how you have taken your years of experience and exposure to people in many different conflict situations and have distilled such nuggets, such gems that people can walk away and use. And so, your contributions have just been so substantial to the field of leadership and workplace relationship management, divorce case management, family relations. And I know I've been one of your avid fans and followers for a long time and incorporate a lot of what I've learned from you into how I approach things as well.
Great. I appreciate hearing that. It's always good to have people out there on the front lines.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And if I could add one thing, because of my work with high conflict people as well, what I have developed is a 2-part communication strategy. You don't want to just walk up to somebody and just blah, 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 because you've already been thinking about it. But you said this word earlier, you're literally catching people off guard, by just going into it.
Good.
Yeah. And so approaching somebody, I'd like to talk about this situation, or I want to talk about this project, and can we set a time later? And so now you've told them what you want to talk about, but you're giving them time to say, okay, how'd that go? What worked? What didn't work? And let's see how we can move forward. So it's always about coaching forward. And I think the biggest thing, and then I've got a structure for how you actually manage the conversation as well, inviting the other person to speak first and things like that. But showing appreciation, showing empathy, attention, respect, all of that's woven into that. But I think the biggest thing for leaders at any level is don't ignore this acting out behavior.
Yes. Yes, and setting limits is one of the biggest issues with high conflict people because they have a hard time stopping themselves. They're just not aware that they need to stop themselves.
Yeah. And they need attention. They're oftentimes feeling lonely, abandoned, isolated because of their behavior.
Yeah. So,
Well, Bill, with your book, I do want to just, let people know where can they find it. Again, it's Mediating High Conflict Disputes, just released this summer, right?
Yes, it was June 15th. And so Mediating High Conflict Disputes and Calming Upset People with EAR is released August 24th.
Okay.
So that's when people are hearing this, it should be available. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookstores, and also our website is www.highconflictinstitute.com. We have the books there. We also have video trainings, live and recorded. We have articles, free articles, and we have consultation on high conflict behavior and solutions. I want to mention, and it may fit right here because we're big fans of coaching and you're doing that, is we developed a method called New Ways for Work Coaching that teaches some of the skills like making proposals and your statements and such. And we do trainings for workplace managers, EAPs, coaches, mediators, administrators, union representatives, everybody. We have a 12-hour training that we do about every other month. And so that's listed on our website, as well as a 12-hour mediator training. So we have that, and I should probably mention we have a 12-hour counselor training with our New Ways for Families method, which you got trained in, 12 years ago, I think. Yes. So we've really, like you said, tried to simplify and make these manageable because high conflict people are everywhere, and we want people to know how they can respond instead of just reacting.
Great. I mean, again, you've done so much, and I love the idea about the new training programs. And I refer people to your website all the time because of all the great articles and books, and now more trainings available too. So there's no reason to be ignorant about this. It's another way of developing your skills, awareness, and dealing with people is a skill. It's an art form, and we need to have knowledge, insight, and awareness on how to do that most successfully.
Yeah, it's possible.
Great. Well, Bill, it's been a delight having you here today on Decoding the Conflict Mindset, and you certainly have made that possible. And so for our viewers and listeners, if you enjoy this, if you've gotten something out of this, please pass it on. You spread the word. There's so much that can be done. Imagine if we could apply these kinds of skills, nuggets that Bill has shared with us today in all of our relationships. What a better world it would be. So click below, send the link, get it out there, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, Bill.
And thank you for all your good work.
If you haven't already, please subscribe below because you will want to hear this next guest speaker coming up. Dr. Tracy Jones. Oh my gosh, a decorated war veteran, a U.S. Air Force Academy graduate, the author of 10 books, 5 of which are dedicated to children and teaching them how to navigate through life in conflict using her favorite pet, her dogs. She's passionate about life, and she's passionate about educating you, sharing with you, and inspiring you with her message. And so we'll talk about, from a leadership perspective, what tends to drive modern day messes. Why is it such a crapshoot today? And is all conflict good or is all conflict bad? Let's take a look at what we can learn from conflict when it's managed well. And just how do you know when it's time to walk away? And as a leader, it's hard, but is it okay to let people fail? Well, join me with Dr. Tracy Jones as we explore these 4 key topics because you will gain a tremendous amount of lessons learned. Again, subscribe. Make sure you don't miss out. Dr. Tracy Jones with Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc. Be there.